what you
And
think.
you tell me from a startup's perspective, do you think, how implementing this policy will have more people working for you, wanting to work for you and all of that?
By default, if you offer 6 hours 3-day work week, everyone will want to work for you.
Mm.
So it's not. I don't think it's a problem on the person wanting to join you. It's more a problem for the company, if any, right? So the way you look at it, that depend. So I think startups already offer some level of flexibility, right? Not in necessarily in terms of number of hours, but when you actually do those hours, right? You
Yeah.
can come in late, you can stay late if you're a developer, for example. Uh, Teams can figure out their own times unless they need to collaborate with somebody else. But the expectation is you are pushing yourself, you are stretching yourself, right? So but irrespective, right? Whichever kind of company, whether you're doing 18 hours or 40 hours or 70 hours, there is going to be some X amount of time that you're not going to be productive, right? Whether you're at home or at office. It's not like because it's 6 hours, 3 days that 6 hours is productive completely. Whereas if you're at the 9 to 5, 5 day work week, that those 40 hours you're productive, you're not, right? There is some percentage in which you're doing time pass, you're basically networking, you're just cooling off, you're doing whatever, right? Um and I think that actually is the problem, right? So potentially, if somebody had 6 day, 6 hour,
3 days.
3 day work week, but is working like 100% of the time without like moving a step, maybe that does make sense, right? But by default, there will be some sort of a productivity impact. So somebody who wants to moonlight, either for learning to make more money, is going to do it anyway, right? And they're actually, again, I was telling them a few minutes back offline that we ended up building a lot of our back end and front end by using senior developers who we could not afford and get them to moonlight with us on nights and weekends. Right, so I'm sure the other way also would be happening in most companies.
No,
Right? So that
as
my
in,
people are moonlighting for somebody else, for example. Yeah.
I see a thing here. So if you look at employment contracts worldwide, right? So there is a fixed number of hours that the person is committed to, like say 40 hours a week,
Yeah.
for which the person is being paid. So you could calculate an hourly rate. But when you look at employment contracts in India generally, first of all, there is no white collar law that regulates
Mm.
employment in India. So we are all governed by the contract law. So if I as an employer and you as an employee have a dispute, you have to go to court to get justice. And you do not, as an employee, have the muscle to fight an employer as big as IBM or Cognizant or TCS or Infy for that matter, right? So that is how it is. So, and when people are saying that you should not be working anywhere else, you should in direct or indirect capacity, that by in itself is curtailing their creative freedom. And the same companies have a different yardstick for the senior management, who's on board of 5 companies, who's advising to a couple of companies, and he has a consulting business on the side, and still willing to pay him a full-time salary. So the same companies have a different yardstick for different levels of people. So that is the reason. And I, don't you think if somebody was like say moonlighting and still could develop a good product to you by moonlighting for you, then in that case, don't you think that that person will be able to deliver it in 3 days? Don't you think that is possible? I'm just asking you. What do you think?
That's an interesting question. So the one way to think about it, we are not talking about making policies for individuals, right? We are talking about making policies for the average, which is for the organization,
Got
right?
it.
So whether 100 people organization or tens of thousands of people or hundreds of thousands, you have to make something which will work like to a law of large numbers, right? So, and I think that's where this stuff comes in, right? Obviously, an individual could end up moonlighting. And he, like I said, you do it at a 3 day or a 5 day kind of setup. I'm not curtailing his freedom by asking him to work 5 days because he will do it anyway, right? That's my view of looking at it. And to speak to your other point, right? Some companies have actually started allowing moonlighting, right? Some of the largest startups allow you to moonlight if you disclose at a developer level, at a product manager level, at multiple levels, which maybe to some extent addresses the differences that you're talking about, right? That you could moonlight, but you declare it upfront that you're moonlighting, which is what, let's say, somebody in leadership would also have to do if they have to be on a board of a different company and they're devoting X amount of time elsewhere as well.
So I kind of get that, and I think it shouldn't be mandatory for somebody to disclose, but it should be optional for them to.
I don't know if you have a thought,
I
Jayesh.
don't think it works, right? I mean, many of the tech companies work for certain customers. There's IP involved, there's proprietary information involved, and you can't just make that kind of exception for employees to decide on their own or keep it optional, right? So you have to make stricter policies, especially because many of the employees are working on products that you want to protect. Plus, employees could be working on customer um, IP or customer engagements that require that kind of data protection and things like that, right? I know when I was working at my previous companies, which were IT service companies, there were these offshore development centers, if you've heard of them, right? For especially some of these financial institutions, banks, etc., where employees wouldn't be allowed to even take their mobile phones inside, right? Because of all the security provisions and so on and so forth, or they had to have certain additional access security to access the customer network and so on. Now, in all such situations, you can't really make exceptions about moonlighting, where you can say, okay, fine, if you decide whether you are breaking a policy or not. So the organizations have to decide for employees, and most Indian organizations are going to not allow moonlighting, especially the service and product companies, because it directly impedes the level of trust they have with their customers, right, as well as their product IP potentially.